start his own import-export business instead, but the world at large took no notice of him. Ponzi lacked the experience and the contacts to attract any serious business. However, Ponzi refused to believe he was the problem and thought that maybe he just needed to advertise his services more. Unfortunately, a few quick calculations made him realize that the costs were well outside of his reach. Just like that, Ponzi's import and export business became another failed venture. The only silver lining for Ponzi was this failure had already given him his next idea. When Ponzi had seen how much money it would cost him to publicize his services, he thought that maybe he should publish his own trade magazine so that other companies would pay him the same kind of giant advertising fees. Ponzi had zero experience when it came to publishing, but in his mind, this was already $1 million business idea. He would call his magazine The Trader's Guide, and he would send it for free to 100,000 companies, doubling the circulation number with each new issue. According to Ponzi's calculations, his initial mailing would cost him around $35,000, but he would make $80,000 in advertising income since he was certain that companies would be lining up around the block to publicize their services in his magazine. Certain of success, Ponzi rented a much larger office and hired 3 staff members. And then he began writing to investors and business owners about the possibility of getting involved with the first ever issue of the Trader's Guide. Then reality came crashing down on Ponzi like a ton of bricks. Nobody was interested. Nobody cared about his obscure little trade magazine, and they certainly were not willing to pay his exorbitant rates to get featured on it. Then, when Ponzi went to his local bank to get a loan because he was almost out of money, he got another harsh dose of reality when the bank president refused his application on the spot, telling him he'd rather close Ponzi's account than load him a single dollar. These were bitter pills to swallow for Ponzi, and left with little choice, he had to fire his staff and sublet his office space to earn some money. But his dreams and ambitions remained as powerful as ever, and Ponzi hoped that his next idea would be the one to make him rich. One day in August 1919, Ponzi was going through his mail when he spotted a letter from Spain. Back when he still thought the Trader's Guide would become the next big thing in advertising, Ponzi was not content with simply doing business in America. He'd envisioned that his guide would be translated into French, German, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, and that he would expand his business into Europe. And thus, he'd contacted many foreign companies about the possibility of doing business together, and it seems that at least one of them was interested. The Spanish author of the letter requested a copy of the Trader's Guide, and to pay for postage, he included something that Ponzi had never seen before, an International Reply Coupon, or IRC. IRCs were prepaid coupons that could be bought in exchange for postage stamps in any country that was a member of the Universal Postal Union. They were commonly used by people who sent letters internationally to cover the cost of a return letter where they were not expecting the other person to pay the postage. But for Ponzi, they were a bolt of inspiration and were about to change his life forever. Years earlier, Ponzi had learned about the concept of arbitrage, the strategy of buying and selling an asset in different markets in order to take advantage of the price difference and make a profit. In the case of IRCs, they were always exchanged for the same postage value regardless of the country, but they were purchased at slightly different prices depending on the fluctuations in local currency. So in theory, Ponzi could buy an IRC in Italy, where the lira had taken a serious hit after the war, and then redeem it in the United States for American postage stamps where he knew the dollar value would be slightly higher. He would then sell those stamps and make a tiny profit. Then, by scaling the operation to thousands, even millions of IRCs, he was looking at some serious money. This was Ponzi's new business plan, and on paper, it seemed like not only a good idea, but also perfectly legal. Arbitrage was a sound investment tactic that had been in use for centuries. So, in January 1920, Ponzi started a new company to handle what seemed to be his most promising business venture yet, and he called it the Securities Exchange Company. Unfortunately for Ponzi, like many times before, reality came in to crush his hopes and dreams. The truth was that the profits from the arbitrage of IRCs were so small that they would be completely wiped out by the cost of shipping the IRCs from one country to another. There literally were not enough IRCs in the entire world to sustain the kind of operation that Ponzi was imagining, and yet he refused to let go of this idea. Ponzi was convinced that this was his golden goose, his one-way ticket to the life of wealth and luxury he'd always felt he deserved. So when the legitimate business proved unsustainable, he turned his idea into the infamous Ponzi scheme that shares his name. After all, his plan to arbitrage IRCs sounded really good, so even though it actually wasn't good at all, maybe he could convince other people it would work and take their money. Now, at its core, the Ponzi scheme is similar to the classic fraud robbing Peter to pay Paul, which Ponzi saw firsthand back when he was involved working for Banco Zarossi. It involves getting people to invest in a business opportunity by promising them huge returns in a short amount of time with little to no risk. However, their money never really gets invested. Instead, the fraudster keeps most of it for themselves, whilst giving some of the profits to earlier investors. When these early investors see such large returns, most of them agree to reinvest their profits back into the business to make even more money, thinking it all seems to be working as advertised. Many of them even tell other people about the opportunity, as they believe the earnings are perfectly legitimate. But in reality, all that's happening is those early investors are getting paid using some of the money from new investors. It's a very simple but effective system that preys on people's greed and financial naivety, but it requires a constant flow of new funds in order to keep the scam going. As soon as the fraudster can't find enough new investors to pay off the returns of his older investors, the con usually falls apart. Even though the scheme was named after Ponzi, he was not the first one to do it. A New York bookkeeper named William Miller used the same technique to con investors out of $1 million back in 1899. And outside of America, a German actress named Adele Spitzer may have operated the first known Ponzi scheme in history in the early 1870s. However, Ponzi took the idea to a whole new level. With the holidays approaching, we all know most people put off shopping until the last minute. And if you have an online store, or you sell anything online, you know the feeling of getting hit with a ton of orders all at once. When you're buried in orders and emails from stressed customers, you'll wish you had ShipStation. ShipStation works with all your favorite places to sell online, including Amazon, Etsy, eBay, Shopify, and more. You can manage every order from one simple dashboard, automate routine shipping tasks, print shipping labels, and easily compare rates and delivery times to make sure you're getting the best deal on every shipment. Basically, you'll save time, money, and stress during the holiday rush. Plus, it's so easy to get started with ShipStation. You can get set up within minutes. And since ShipStation is sponsoring this video, they